Hey y'all, it's me, Kevy. Wow, this was such a better reading month than March. I didn't feel stressed out about my reading and didn't set any strict plans or goals. This opened me up to go with my mood reading flow and read almost exclusively books by transgender authors. Prior to this, the number of trans books I had read was quite limited, and as you saw with my George and Manhunt videos, they were usually challenging, painful reads. Not this month, though. These books were powerful, and they were healing. I feel so good having read these magnificent works. But before I share them with you, I want to know, what do you think of my jewelry? My dear friend Katie started her own jewelry business called The Beauty of Imperfection. Her work is all handmade and embraces the charming nature of imperfection. These pieces were custom made for me. The earrings are clip-ons because I don't have pierced ears. I love this hollow square shape, as well as the pride gummy bears and the trans hearts. And then there's this beautiful blue and purple heart that's all glittery and sparkly, and oh, I love it. Thank you so much, Katie, for these beautiful pieces. If you're interested in seeing more of her work or picking something up for yourself, the link to her website is in the description below. Transgender Day of Visibility was March 31st, and several people sent me books that day. Jack from Spread Book Joy sent me a gift card, which I used to pick up Leatherman, that book my friend Mercy Bella is turning into a musical, and Cheer Up, a transgender sapphic graphic novel. Thank you so much, Jack. I've already read Cheer Up, and I'll be reading Leatherman ASAP. Chelsea Faith bought me 2 books. The first was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I've never read any Lucy Foley, but she sounds like an author I would love. And of course, I love anything Parisian, so I'm really excited to give this a read. The other book Chelsea got me was Gender Euphoria by Laura Kate Dale, which I've already read as part of #TransGirlApril. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Jeremy Fee got me Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Cheng, Thom, a trans book that has been on my TBR for quite some time now. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for getting me this book so I could finally read it and love it. Also, my wish list says that somebody bought me Terry Pratchett's Moving Pictures. However, I don't know who it was, and I haven't received it digitally or in the mail. So if you got that for me, I'm sorry I haven't gotten it yet, so I can't properly thank you because I don't know who you are. So sorry, please tell me who you are down below. I received another extra special piece of book mail this week that I'm super excited to show y'all. Last year, one of my favorite reads was And by Fire by Evie Hawtrey. I read it through NetGalley, and it's finally coming out this month. In case this is your first time hearing about it, here's the description. Tempered by fire and separated by centuries, 2 extraordinary female detectives track a pair of murderous geniuses who will burn the world for their art in this mystery perfect for fans of Sarah Penner and Dan Brown. Nigella Parker, detective inspector with the city police, has a deeply rooted fear of fire and a talent for solving deadly arson cases. When a charred figure is found curled beside Sir Christopher Wren's monument to the Great Fire of London, Nigella is dragged into a case pitting her against a murderous artist creating sculptures using burnt flesh. Nigella partners with Colm O'Leary of Scotland Yard to track the arsonist across Greater London. The pair are more than colleagues. They were lovers until O'Leary made the mistake of uttering 3 little words. Their past isn't the only buried history as they race to connect the dots between an antique nail pulled from a dead man's hands and a long-forgotten architect dwarfed by the life's work of Sir Christopher Wren. Wren, one of London's most famous architects, is everywhere the pair turn. Digging into his legacy leads the DCIs into the coldest of cold cases, a search for a bookseller gone missing during the Great Fire of London, more than 350 years earlier. While looking for their friend, a second pair of detectives, a lady-in-waiting to the Queen and a royal fireworks maker, discover foul play in the supposedly accidental destruction of St. Paul's Cathedral. But did that same devilry lead to murder? And can these centuries-old crimes help to catch a modern-day murderer? As Nigella and O'Leary rush to decode clues past and present, London's killer artist sets his sights on a member of the investigative team as the subject of his next fiery masterpiece. Oh, it is so good. And since I was one of the first people to pre-order it, Evie sent me some And by Fire goodies. I haven't looked at any of this yet. I wanted to wait till we were on camera, so here we go. Oh, she sent me this letter. She says, "Hey Pyro, aka Kevy, congratulations, you earned that title, and I mean it as the highest compliment, because your pre-order of And by Fire was one of the first 25. I know I said I wasn't mailing anything out until after And by Fire released, but hey, I'm having one of those days, and I'd rather do the fun thing than the thing I should be doing." Writing Nigella and O'Leary's next crime adventure. Ooh, that excites me that there's gonna be a sequel. Ooh, I'm excited. And nothing is more fun than setting out book goodies. I hope you love them. I certainly love and appreciate your enthusiasm for my crime fiction / mystery debut. Thank you. All the best, Evie Hawtrey. Oh, and there's even a little handwritten note at the bottom. She says, "Kevy, being on your Best Reads of 2021 video started my new year off right. Confidence very much boosted. Easier to take a leap of faith when someone thinks you'll stick the landing. Thanks, Evie." Oh, of course, Evie. You know I love this book. And I am just so happy for you and your release, and I cannot wait for what you're writing next. Now let's look at the rest of this stuff. Ooh. Ooh, I'm so excited. Ooh. So first, we have a bookmark. Look at that. It's got the tower and by Fire cover, and the quote, "And by fire resurgam, I shall rise again." And on the back, it says, "Two extraordinary female detectives, tempered by fire and separated by more than 3 centuries, must use their tenacity and intelligence to track a pair of murderous geniuses who would burn the world for their art." Ooh. Oh my gosh, and look at that little, oh, that's so cute. Ah, it's a little Big Ben. I'll have to show this to my little nephew. He's obsessed with Big Ben. Oh, an autographed sticker. It says, "And by Fire to Kevy, XOXO, Evie Hawtrey." Oh, I love that. Where should I put it? Oh, I'll have to think of somewhere. Ooh. "And by Fire Resurgam, a gift from Evie Hawtrey." This is a candle. Ooh, look at that. Oh. Oh, I like that. It's like an earthy citrus. Yeah. Yeah, I dig this. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I can't wait to use this at my new place. And then the piece de resistance. Wow. Like a bag, like a purse bag tote thing. Ooh, it's so pretty. It's got that skyline and the quote. Oh, it looks so good. Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Evie. I love this. This is awesome. I can't wait to use it. And oh, I really appreciate your support of me and my channel. And oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for all of this awesome merch. And if you're interested in learning more about the book or picking up a copy for yourself, I'll have the author's website linked in the description. All right, now let's get into the books. The first book I read this month was Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars. As soon as it arrived, I had to start reading it. This book is written in the style of a memoir with an unreliable narrator and with many fantasy elements, like finding mermaids on the beach. It's about a trans girl who flees her hometown of gloom and goes to the big city to live on the Street of Miracles with the rest of the trans women, known as Femmes. One day, finally being fed up with all of the violence that they face at the hands of cis-het men, the Femmes decide to form a gang, beating up men on the streets. Oh, it's wonderful. This book is very much about what I like to call built-up tranny rage. Reminder, that's a word for trans folks. Don't use it if you're not trans. Thank you. All of us seem to have this rage within us, from the discrimination and abuse we face as a community as well as personally. The moral of this story is to never hurt a tranny, because you never know how close we are to bursting. I love that. Not only was this rage relatable, but the formation of this gang gave them so much agency against their oppressors, and it felt really good to read about. This book is just full of trans joy, and it filled me with euphoria. I loved this book so much that I kissed it when I finished reading it. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's already one of my favorite books of the year. The next book is a relatively ancient text about a trans woman who lived in the 1600s. Yes, trans people existed even back then. The book is called The Transvestite Memoirs by the Abbé de Choisy. As a child, the Abbé's mother would dress him up in little girl's clothes all the way until he turned 18, and then he chose to continue cross-dressing on his own accord, even going out in public and for a while living full-time as female. Also, just a quick note about pronouns. I'll just say flat out, in cases like this, pronouns can be messy and confusing. The introductions refer to him exclusively using male pronouns, which is the precedent I'll be following here. If we could go back in time and ask her directly, it's likely she would prefer she, her pronouns. But we can't know for sure, so I'm just doing the best I can with what the book provided. Using he and him to refer to the Abbé doesn't negate that he's still a transgender woman. This book has 2 parts, the first of which is the Abbé's memoirs. The memoirs consist primarily of descriptions of the lavish vêtements he wore and the events he wore them to, and then the details of his various loves. One case which delighted me was that the Abbé was briefly married to a trans man. Mademoiselle Charlotte, known en garçon as Monsieur de Molny, lived as a man while she was with the Abbé, and was truly happy living this way. However, eventually Charlotte's family insisted she quit her shenanigans and marry a real man, so she abandoned her male persona and resumed living as a woman. But for a brief, shining moment, they were a 17th century tea for tea couple. Oh, I gotta love that. Since the memoirs are written late in his life, I was under the impression that the events he was writing about took place when he was older, particularly because when dressed up, they would refer to him as Madame instead of Mademoiselle, which implies being older. This made some parts of the book pretty uncomfortable to read, at least until the very, very end, where he says that he was only 23 by the end of the whole thing. So at least the age difference was minimal and considered normal and natural at the time. The memoirs are only the first part of the book. Part 2 is a fairy tale written in that time period, believed to be based on the Abbé. Even more exciting is that it is believed that this fairy tale was written by Charles Perrault, the man who wrote Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Little Red Riding Hood. The story of the Marquise-Marquis de Banneville is about a woman who so desperately wants to have a daughter that she decides that even if she gives birth to a boy, she will raise her as a girl. The child is born and the boy is named Marianne. The mother never reveals to her daughter the truth of her birth, so she grows up believing that she is a cisgendered girl. They didn't have proper sex ed before, so she wouldn't have known that her parts were different from other women's. One day she falls in love, but her mom forbids her from marrying him to prevent the truth from coming out. Oh y'all, this is such a beautiful fairy tale, and it brought me so much trans joy. It is a travesty that this tale has been suppressed and erased and forgotten, and not elevated alongside Perrault's other work. Because a story like this could have done wonders for all the baby trans kids out there for hundreds of years now. Even if you don't want to read the memoirs, at least read the story of the Marquise-Marquis de Banneville. At the end of the book, there's an afterword, written by someone different than the person who wrote the introductions. I really didn't like the afterword. He was just explaining the difference between transvestite and transsexual, and how the Abbé was clearly a transvestite and not a transsexual. But his interpretation clearly comes from a lack of understanding. For starters, yes, the Abbé uses the word transvestite, but that's because it was written over 200 years before the word transsexual came to exist. So any gender variance would have been labeled transvestite, not just exclusively people who cross-dress for fetish reasons. Oh yeah, just to clarify for y'all, nowadays transvestite is used specifically to mean a cisgender man who cross-dresses for sexual gratification. Transsexual is a category of trans person who has had gender confirmation surgeries to become her ideal self. I will note, though, that a lot of trans women nowadays, even those who have had gender confirmation surgeries, don't use the term transsexual. It's typically considered a more dated term, but some still do use it. And while the author is using the term transsexual, which now has a more specific meaning, when the afterword was written, it was used more broadly to refer to anyone transgender, because they didn't have the word transgender yet. But anyway, the argument put forward by the author of the afterword says that throughout the text, the Abbé never laments having a penis or wishes that it would be cut off. But so many trans women keep their privates. Surgeries or want of surgery is not required for a woman to be trans. She felt more comfortable dressing as a woman and presented as a woman in public. Living as a woman clearly makes her trans. One particular quote that the author used to prove his point really pissed me off. The Abbé describes wearing her dresses in public, saying, "When I was at a ball or the theater, wearing my beautiful robe de chambre, diamonds and patches, and heard people whisper near me, 'This is a lovely woman,' I experienced an inward glow of pleasure which is incomparable. It is so strong. Ambition, riches, even love does not equal it, because we always love ourselves more deeply than we love others." And this guy's interpretation was that the feeling she's describing is obviously erotic in nature, and therefore evidence that she would be more accurately described as a transvestite. But see, as an actual trans person, those words mean something completely different. This reads like a phenomenon known as gender euphoria. Gender euphoria being the opposite of gender dysphoria. So instead of the awful feeling that arises from being seen as the wrong gender, it's the joy one feels when embracing their true gender and having other people validate their gender publicly. These are the feelings that the Abbé was describing. She just didn't have the modern clinical language to do so. Leave it to a straight man to take something beautiful and make it sexual. So yeah, the entire afterword is garbage and should be annexed. But the rest of this book is a magical piece of queer history and an absolute must-read. Next, I read a graphic novel called Cheer Up by Crystal Frasier, about two high school girls who have drifted apart over the years, but become reunited through cheerleading. As they spend more time together, they begin to develop feelings for each other. This was a really cute queer romance, and I really loved the transgender representation. This panel really stood out to me. Annie asks, "So if it's so stressful, why do you do it?" referring to transitioning. Bibi responds, "Because it's still better than trying to be a boy. Sometimes it sucks, but other times it makes me feel great. When I tried being a boy, I never felt anything. I was numb." Oh, this was so good. It's trans, it's lesbian, and a great little book about being queer in high school. I picked up Daybreak by Gwen Benaway after hearing about it on Bethan Brninga Sokoler's channel. Since I've been on my trans kick, #transgirlapril, a collection of tranny poetry sounded like exactly what I needed. There are 42 poems in this collection, and almost all of them are about sex. While I do really appreciate the unique perspective of sex as a transsexual, it didn't really resonate with me. But there were a few poems that I really, really loved, which I will read for you now. The poems in this collection have no names, just numbers. First is number 16. "There's beauty in everything that breaks open. A robin's egg, the sun in summer, a girl beneath a boy, a tranny in a hospital bed. Each wound, another chance to birth light." I really love the imagery of this poem, particularly the tranny in the hospital bed, and how gender-affirming surgeries aren't just cosmetic. They truly bring light into the world and give the patient a joy that they never before experienced. Not all trans women have surgeries, but for those who do, it is a momentous, life-changing experience. The next poem is number 17. "A birth certificate is a poem the government writes for you. I've changed my name, my sex, my gender. Still this fraudulent country calls me sir." This poem is excellent. It's spot on relatable. At the time, I legally transitioned, changing my name, gender, and just about all of my documents except for my birth certificate. The only way to change your birth certificate was if you had bottom surgery to physically change your genitals. Like I said a minute ago, plenty of transgender women do not have bottom surgery, whether they can't afford it or just feel like they don't need it. However, the government is gatekeeping part of this transition from us. I believe, at least in Illinois, since I did all my document changes, they've changed this law. So I should be able to change my birth certificate soon. I just haven't yet had the opportunity. But yeah, Illinois is a pretty progressive state for trans people, and much of our country is not as fortunate. Trans people need access to these things, even if they're in a red state. Now, this last poem is number 40, and it's a bit longer than the previous two. Transsexuals die every day, but no one writes a book about it. I should account for the privilege of being a learned tranny. Yes, I have read your theory, though I prefer the poetics I make, with my body between my legs, on my knees. Which of these sins should I account for? I let my hair grow long and forget to shave my face. Something in my persistence betrays my womanhood, reveals me as a pretender. I don't blame you for looking for a more coherent misery. The only good trannies are already dead, Marsha P. and Miss Rivera. May they rest in power. Until someone tweets their photographs twice yearly when the cis perform allyship, conjure our digital beauty. I apologize for not failing enough to be worth saving, for being raped but not beaten, for writing another book instead of disappearing. Now that is my kind of poetry. First, it highlights how nobody gives a damn about transgender people. Academia would rather debate our existence than do anything that would actually benefit our community. Meanwhile, no matter what we do as trans people, we have to live with the perpetual fear that someone might try to clock us. The wrong person might figure out we're trans, and then we're dead. And nobody gives a damn. Cis people love to celebrate Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, but again, nobody cared about them until they were dead and martyred. Y'all remember when I told you about Sylvia Rivera's "Y'all better quiet down" speech? After being beaten by the people in charge of the event, she goes on stage and holds a mirror up to the gays and lesbians in the crowd, who only a few years after Stonewall have already decided to trample on the trans people who fought for their rights in an attempt to make rights for gays and lesbians just a little bit easier to acquire. So many cis people claim to be allies when it's convenient, or when it's time to make that annual trans post on social media. But posting that Marsha P. Johnson was pretty neat doesn't stop trans people from getting murdered in the streets, or get us access to health care, or housing, or employment, and so on. This poem is a call to action. Give a damn about trans people all the time, even when we're not just some tragic headline. This book is a beautiful collection of poetry about the trans experience, and I am glad to have read it. Also, anytime I hear the word daybreak, I think of the John Waters film Serial Mom, one of my favorite movies of all time. Oh, it's so good. Go watch it. Daybreak. Daybreak. Also this month, I was looking into Alison Rumfitt's book, Tell Me I'm Worthless, which unfortunately isn't out in the States yet. So I was looking for some more of her work and found a poetry collection called Tyranny. Do you see what she did there? Tranny. So here's an excerpt from her poem, Open Wound. The neo-vagina is a flower of evil. Remember how we were walking and then we saw that dead body bloated with flies? Her pussy open to the wind, crawling with insects, rodents hollowing out her cavities for a warm place to hide from the coming winter. Remember? I do. And we wondered how she died, and did she have a family somewhere? And what should we do about this poor woman? Poor sad, dead corpse, bloated, putrid, festering, and walked closer and saw it was actually the corpse of a man whose cock had been gnawed off by a stray dog, leaving an open wound in its place. The face of the corpse looked complicated, but if it was me, it would be too. But maybe it would look happy. Whew. There's a lot in there. Yeah, this is a really harsh look at the way trans bodies are viewed after we're dead. TERFs love to argue that archaeologists are gonna find trans corpses and not be able to know that they're trans. And so many trans people with unaccepting families wind up buried with a name and clothes that don't reflect who they are. It's really awful. And then here is an excerpt from the prose section, titled Tyranny. Trans women navigate a Handmaid's Tale dystopia. We can't blame trans poets for being so bodily focused. Even without dysphoria, being trans is so boringly focused upon the body, what it does, where it goes, and so on. How much matter it inhabits, so on. Poetry without body is just prose. Prose is just poetry with too many or not enough gaps. Trans women are not mentioned in The Handmaid's Tale. Gay men are. They are hung from the wall. I would guess trans women would also be hung from the wall as well. If I wake up tomorrow finding myself in a biology-obsessed misogynist dystopia, then I'll be waking up in a world I've lived in my whole life. Atwood says everything in the book really happens or has happened. I guess it resonated with America and Britain and Canada because in the book it was happening to white women. In Gilead, they have secret clubs where the husbands come to fuck a tranny at the weekends. We're all dolled up in sequins. We take them. They take us for granted. There are no financial transactions. It was just this or it would be the wall for us, you know. In Gilead, trans women do not exist. In Gilead, trans men do not exist. In Gilead, non-binary people also do not exist. There are no trans people in Gilead. Trans people were a symptom of what was happening before. Really, Gilead is the ideal misogynist dystopia for transphobic feminist theorists. In Gilead, no differentiation is made between gay men and trans women. We're all killed just the same. We are all ignoring the biological imperative to reproduce, which is holy. See, I've already been avoiding Handmaid's Tale because, I'd heard before how people only started to give a damn because these things were happening to white women. So yeah, I had no interest in reading or watching Handmaid's Tale, and now I hear this trans take and I'm just even more put off of it. Do you think The Handmaid's Tale still has merit or value? Let me know in the comments below. No, actually, please don't. I don't want to hear it. I'm glad it works for some people, but it's just not gonna work for me. But yeah, Tyranny was a nice little collection, and I'm glad I managed to squeeze it in to hold me over until I can get my hands on Tell Me I'm Worthless. My dear friend, and one of my favorite figures in the Chicago queer community, is Sky Kubakub. They are a fashion designer and founder of Rebirth Garments, creating queer crip fashion that is accessible to all genders, abilities, and sizes. Sky believes in a movement called radical visibility. Most fashion for fat, trans, or disabled people is ugly as fuck. It's boring and designed to make us disappear. Radical visibility goes to the other extreme, designing clothes with bright colors and bold prints that feel comfortable and empowering and even sexy. So what does this look like? Chest binders to flatten the chest, tucking panties to hide a bulge, packer panties to add a bulge, snaps instead of zippers, and so on. The past 2 years since masks have become so popular, Rebirth Garments started producing masks with a clear window, so lip readers could still communicate. That is just a handful of the awesome stuff they create. I am a big fan of Rebirth Garments, and I've even modeled in some of their shows. Here I am modeling their quilted lingerie, as well as pasties with the queer crip symbol. Then this photo shoot, done by Colectivo Multipolar, who also did the previous photo, was almost featured in Playboy. Yeah. They reached out to Sky to do an interview about transgender undergarments, and we did this shoot to print alongside it. Unfortunately, they wound up choosing to print the article without pictures. But, I mean, how many people get to say they were almost in Playboy? Now, the reason I bring up Sky is because they wrote a book, Radical Visibility, a queer crip dress reform movement manifesto. This book is all about the meaning of queer crip and radical visibility and how the movement is expressed through Rebirth Garments. I've been meaning to read this for years, and I finally picked up a copy. Oh, it is great. I love its design with various pieces glued to colorful construction paper. It also taught me a lot more about Skye, and that before we met, we were at the same Beauty and the Beast show starring Matt Frasier. So many wonderful photos of Rebirth Garments being worn by all kinds of people. If you want to learn more about Skye and Rebirth Garments, I'll have a link to their website in the description below. One of the last trans books I read this month was Summer Fun by Jean Thornton. It's about a trans woman named Gayla who works at a hostel in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and is a big fan of a band called the Get Happies, which is a fictionalized version of the Beach Boys. The difference between the Get Happies and the Beach Boys is that the Get Happies music is more futuristic sci-fi, and their lead singer is a closeted trans woman. That might be considered a spoiler, but I knew that's where it was going just from reading the description on Goodreads. Like, it's pretty obvious, so I wouldn't count it as a spoiler. This book has many unusual properties. The most startling thing was that it's written in the second person. The entire book is written as letters from Gayla to this reclusive singer. It feels especially strange when Gayla is sharing stories from the singer's childhood. Like, and then you did this, and then you felt that, and your father said this to you. Like, ma'am, you weren't there. How do you know that? In that sense, Gayla's an unreliable narrator. She has knowledge of all the most intimate details of this woman's life. Things that nobody would have ever known about her. So does she have some sort of magical insight? Or has she made up the whole thing as some sort of transsexual fantasy? Is the singer even trans? So yeah, Summer Fun is a dual timeline, alternating between the present story in 2009, where Gayla talks about her life as a trans woman at the hostel, and the past in the 60s, following the singer's adolescence and rise to stardom. But one of the best aspects of this book is seeing what it would have been like to transition in the 60s. Even now, in 2022, it is hard to transition. Like, really hard. But 60 years ago, when most of the general public hadn't even heard of trans people, and even being gay was considered a crime, it had to have been rough. And Jean Thornton did an excellent job fleshing this out. I especially loved the introduction of Lana, the only other trans woman we meet from back then. The reveal that she was trans was so subtle, it took me several pages to catch on. Even though we only meet her once, she's a fascinating character, and she comes up a lot in the singer's thoughts about her gender. Between the two timelines, I think I preferred the present one. Those chapters were typically shorter, and aside from the times when they were transing it up, the flashback stuff wasn't really doing much for me. Perhaps if I had more knowledge of the Beach Boys, it would have better retained my interest. The one detriment to the present timeline is that Gayla is unlikable as fuck. She sucks. I really wanted to like her, but the way she's just so closed off to people and refuses to let anybody into her life in a meaningful way is just so irritating. Also, I'd originally thought that this is going to be more of a pen pal style book. Like Gayla would send letters to the singer, and then the singer would respond, and in their exchange, finally come out. Explain that she became a recluse so that she could transition and live privately as a woman. But no, it was all just one-sided, so even though the flashback timeline is from the singer's perspective, it's still being narrated by Gayla. And that was a little strange, but I did get used to it. Overall, I'd say this book was a mixed bag. It had some beautiful scenes, like a transsexual hippie leading an entire orchestra through the Donner Pass in order to infuse their recordings with the spirits of the cannibalized Donner Party. I did enjoy this book, and I believe it has a lot to offer. If you like dual timelines, unreliable narrators, unlikable narrators, or 60s music, then definitely pick up this book. After that, I read Gender Euphoria by Laura Kate Dale. I already discussed the subject of gender euphoria when talking about the Transvestite Memoirs, but this book's mission is to balance out all the sad and painful depictions of trans people in the media by countering it with essays of trans joy. About half of the essays were by Dale herself, and the rest are from all sorts of trans and non-binary people, covering a wide array of topics, such as tattoos and cosplay, gaming, roller derby, and more. One of my favorite essays in the collection was Laura Kate Dale's Feeling Safe, Welcome, and Seen by My Teen Idols. In this essay, she discusses how two of her favorite emo bands as a teen wound up being super gender affirming for her. I love this essay because her two favorite emo bands are my two favorite emo bands, My Chemical Romance and Against Me. Now, I didn't have an emo phase. I mean, yeah, I was severely depressed, but the music I turned to was pop diva ballads. I never got into the emo music or that emo look. I didn't get into My Chemical Romance until I saw a drag queen perform The Black Parade, and damn was it life-changing. I'd never listened to music like that before, and it filled me with so much joy. The Black Parade is now one of my favorite albums, and I don't associate it with emo or angsty or depressed feelings. It's literally just euphoria. This album is euphoric. I remember when I first heard of Against Me. I had just come out as trans the year before, and one day I open up iTunes and see there's a new album called Transgender Dysphoria Blues. And I'm like, what is this? Are cis people appropriating our experience? What? So I showed it to my librarian friend, and together we learned that the lead singer of Against Me, Laura Jane Grace, had recently come out as transgender, and this album was a way of her processing her feelings as she began to transition. This album means so much to me. Again, it isn't the sort of music I normally listen to, but it's full of real trans feelings and painful moments that I've experienced. I relate to it so hard. So like the author, Against Me gives me gender euphoria too. It makes me feel seen and understood. Laura Jane Grace also wrote a memoir, which I've picked up and will hopefully read soon. Something I wanted to note about gender euphoria as a concept is that it isn't exclusive to trans people. Yeah, everyone can and probably has experienced it, even if you haven't realized it. Have you ever just put on a dress or your favorite shade of lipstick and thought, damn, I look good? Or do you love the camaraderie that comes from being part of a sports team? Those can be examples of gender euphoria. I think this book can be important for cis readers, not just as a wonderful collection of trans joy, but because it could also help you spot those moments of gender euphoria in your own life. And that's a beautiful thing. I read This Time for Me twice this month. Once as an ebook and once as an audiobook. Alexandra Billings is one of my favorite people ever, so this book is going to get its own video coming soon. One happy little coincidence this month is that while I was reading This Time for Me, I was also reading Alice in Wonderland. Then Alexandra Billings began to make references to Alice in Wonderland in her book. During the chapter when she was homeless, she says, I'd bump into humans I thought I knew from way, way back, and so I'd speak to them. But then when I'd hear them cry for help, I realized I didn't know who they were. I met a hookah-smoking caterpillar, and I think I once ate a cake that made me far too tall for the rest of the world. Sometimes I heard honking through a thick cloud of dust and guts and blood and fear, and a red, red sheet of body parts littering a long, grassy field. Off, off, off with their heads, I'd say. It just got odder, bigger, louder, curiouser and curiouser. Alice in Wonderland is a children's classic, and it's always been important to me as a queer person. One of the earliest videos of me is when I was 2, dancing along to the Garden song from the Disney movie. My mom said this is the moment she knew I was gonna be gay. So yeah, I've always loved Alice in Wonderland, and it was nice to revisit this book. I also need to read the sequel, Through the Looking Glass, because my all-time favorite Lewis Carroll verse is The Walrus and the Carpenter, which comes from that second book. I read a few mysteries this month. The first was Her Dying Day by Mindy Carlson, which I got through NetGalley. As usual, I'll save my review of this book for a separate video, but overall I really enjoyed it. Last year, my aunt introduced me to the Three Pines series by Louise Penny. I loved the first 2, Still Life and A Fatal Grace, but I was waiting until April to read book 3, The Cruelest Month, because it was set during Easter. When a psychic comes to town, the residents of Three Pines decide to hold a seance at a haunted house. But one resident does not leave the house alive. Oh, this book is so good. It has a large cast of characters, but the thing is most of those characters are the recurring residents, so you know they're in the clear, meaning there's only a handful of actual suspects in the case. And while I did have my suspicions, they never solidly landed on anybody. I didn't have a definitive, oh, they did it moment. But I really liked the mystery and the way it was resolved. It made perfect sense in the story. There's also an ongoing B-plot in the Three Pines novels. Inspector Gamache was once a beloved figure until the Arnaud case. Since then, Arnaud and his people have been out for revenge. In addition, we have Nicole, the most unlikable person in the Force. Yet for some reason, Gamache always insists in working with her. But how is she tied up in the business with Arnaud? I really appreciated that Louise Penny took the time to discuss Canada's history of Indigenous racism, and how it continues to be a systemic, institutional, and personal issue. I know a lot of white people love to think that the land up north is all good and pure, and not full of all the same fucked up racist shit we got here in the States. But it is. And they get away with perpetuating these harmful systems and behaviors because, they're just Canada. They're not doing anything, right? So it was really illuminating to get to read about this. And I'm so glad that Penny brought attention to this issue. My favorite thing about the Cruelest month was its use of themes. One of my favorite things a book can do is have a main idea and incorporate it into every single facet of the book. You may remember when I read Terry Pratchett's Going Postal, the thing I loved most about it was all the ways Pratchett incorporated hope. In the case of the Cruelest month, the motifs Penny used to be in theme with the Easter setting were rebirth, miracles, and magic. Everywhere you looked, you'd see these things. All the flora growing and turning green. A man who talks to trees, and they talk back to him. And my favorite part of this book, Ruth and her ducklings. Somebody had messed with the duck's nest, meaning that the parents abandoned the eggs. Ruth Zardo, this bitter, cantankerous old woman who never has a nice thing to say to anyone, decides to take the nest home and help the two eggs hatch. After their birth, she feels like a mother to them and takes them for walks around the neighborhood. And as they're walking around, she smiles at people, which they comment is a miracle. All the way these themes were interwoven throughout the story really made it feel cohesive and well planned. I really love this series, and I am so excited to read book 4, A Rule Against Murder. One last mystery I read this month is one that I actually wrote. It's called Chicago Beauty, about a murder at a beauty store. I'll have the link to it down below, as well as links to my video reading the story and the video discussing it. Please give it a read and let me know what you think of it. Oh, and my story is on Goodreads, so after you've read it, please give it a rating on there too. And thank you to Devin Torkavian, the author of Fairy Wing, for designing the cover. I love it. Yay, go read it. In March, I started listening to East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I got about a third of the way through it when This Time for Me came out, so I put it aside to listen to Alexandra Billings. After that, I just didn't feel like finishing it. The hours I had devoted to the story so far hadn't pulled me in, and I didn't want to spend another dozen hours listening to a story I didn't care about. It was fine, it just wasn't doing anything for me. The last book I finished in April was The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, which I buddy read with Berna from Berna's Bookish Adventures. We did this as a super low-key buddy read over the course of the month, and I really appreciated getting to take my time with it and not feeling pressured to try to finish certain sections by certain dates. So thank you for that, Berna. The Blind Assassin is a book within a book within a book. On the top layer, we have Iris, an elderly woman remembering her childhood with her since-deceased sister Laura. After Laura's death, they found a book that she wrote and published it posthumously, titled The Blind Assassin, and many of the chapters of this book are chapters from that book. The in-universe Blind Assassin book is about two lovers, a vagrant and a married woman. While they're together, he tells her the story of a science fiction novel he's writing for her. In that story, we have a world where the working classes worked so hard that many people go blind, and these blind people can only get work as assassins. So yeah, those are all the layers of this story. This book's twists were terribly predictable, but the thing is, it's not like it's a thriller. Atwood didn't write this book to be full of surprises and gotcha moments. It was very well written, and she did a great job of placing clues throughout the text to lead the character to the truth. And I loved that. Thank you so much, Berna, for reading this with me, and I look forward to our next buddy read. Yes. Wow, y'all. Wasn't this such a great reading month? I'm thrilled with everything that I read and would love to keep up this energy were I not so busy. Speaking of that, I am in the process of moving, so this will probably be my last video from this location. I don't expect to produce any more content in the month of May, but I'll still be on all my socials if you want to reach out and say hi or anything. I've got big plans for June though, so get ready for a big ol' bang when I return. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!